This board meeting included the CFO, the CEO, the chief technology officer, chief product officer, and all that kind of stuff. The gap they had in their analysis was that they were looking at, okay, this is how much we're spending in our headcount. These are our revenue projections. We expect that we're going to be able to release XYZ products within a certain timeline, right? And they're basing all of it off of that.
Are you a scaling SaaS founder? Ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those who don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where resilience in action looks a lot less like a TED Talk and more like figuring it out mid-crisis with a Wi-Fi that keeps cutting out. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I hope B2B SaaS founders like you grow from traction to scale. Here, growth is more than just numbers. It's about crafting a future-proof company, premium valuation, and leaders who build a business of significance while living epic, adventurous lives. What does it take to lead through change, still stay innovative, and stay grounded to your vision? In this episode, we follow the powerful journey of a leader who's turned adversity into fuel and uncertainty into a launch pad for growth. It's a story of resilience, not the buzzword kind, but the gritty daily decision to adapt, show up, and lead with purpose. We'll dive into how effective leaders build creative, collaborative teams, especially in times of rapid change. You'll hear how clarity of vision becomes an anchor when the environment shifts, and why adaptability isn't just a survival tactic, it's a growth strategy. We'll also explore practical strategies for cultivating innovation within your team, communicating clearly, especially when things aren't going according to plan, and embracing change as something to lean into, not to avoid. If you've ever wondered how to keep your team aligned while the ground shifts beneath you, or how to turn challenge into momentum, this episode offers actionable insights and fresh inspiration for the journey ahead. Let's get into it. Our founder on Tuesday was Harish Chandramouli, the engineer turned founder behind Flare. Harish walked us through how smart automation, unstructured data, and real-time feedback loops can give scrappy teams an edge. This episode is a blueprint for CTOs navigating both product and people. And our expert guest last week was Christian Jack, founder of the Sales Dojo, who showed us how to rebuild sales training from the inside out. From broken demos to belief-driven selling, Christian helped us rethink the psychology behind the pitch and how to sell with substance. If you missed either episode, go back and check those two out. My guest today is Nahed Khairallah, a global startup strategist and champion of hypergrowth done right. Over the last decade, Nahed has helped transform 7-figure companies into 9-figure success stories using HR as the accelerator most founders overlook. His journey spans the US, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, where he scaled teams across borders, cultures, and some chaos. From building lean HR ops that saved millions to doubling headcount in months without losing culture. Nahed's track record is a masterclass in high-impact leadership. Welcome someone who's turned human capital into growth capital, Nahed Khairallah. Hey, Nahed, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, you've done something that's pretty amazing, and that is taken HR and made it the rocket fuel for growth. How did that journey begin? How'd you get into this?
Yeah, it's one of those questions I get every time, right? Like most HR people, I kind of stumbled into it. It was never planned, like I'm going to be this HR person when I was going into college and so forth. But I really got into it because my first job out of college was at an IT hardware and software reseller, small regional company, and I majored in business administration at the time. I was actually going to grad school for information technology management, so completely irrelevant to HR. So I was in sales, in IT sales pretty much. And I'm working at this company that has triple-digit growth year over year, doing pretty well. And all of a sudden, they crash and burn to the ground. Wow. And it was, and again, first job out of college, you're like, what's going on here? I don't get it. Like, we're making money. I'm in sales. I can see the numbers, right? I see the growth, We're hiring more people. We're entering new markets. What happened? So the more people I spoke to in that company after the fact and sort of doing a postmortem, everything led to bad people management, bad decisions, incorrect org structure, bad ways of working. Everything led to sort of a people-related issue. So I went sort of on this escapade to learn more about this HR thing. As I was doing other work and just doing other jobs within my field, and I went on this journey of self-learning, and I spent about a couple of years just studying, going through like certifications, talking to other HR professionals and so forth. And then I'm like, this is interesting. I want to do some pro bono work for it. So what I did is that I'm like, what? This is something I want to explore. I'm going to keep doing the work I'm doing. In my free time, I'm going to do pro bono work. And the first thing that came to my mind is, why don't I go talk to accelerators, VC companies, PE firms, all that kind of stuff? Because typically they have up and coming companies. I'm offering my services for free. Again, I don't have experience in the topic. Never done it before, but it's a win-win situation. I can give some sort of advice from just the learning that I've had and just the early experiences, but also it's a good learning for me. And the first thing I started working on mostly is the recruitment side of things, because people typically, they are really the engine that drives any company. So that was really successful when I started doing it. And turns out I have sort of a talent for that kind of thing and finding the right people and just, understanding who fits where and when and all that kind of thing. So I started building a name for myself in that space. And a couple of years into it, I decided to start my own company, offering specifically at the time recruiting services for startup organizations. But then it started really snowballing from there. And within 3 to 4 years, I really started becoming more of like an HR advisor for startups as opposed to just looking at the talent acquisition side of things. And my technology and operations background really helped a lot, because the more I dug into it, HR, when people think of HR, they think of the very high level stuff like, hey, we're hiring people, we're doing payroll, we're looking at compliance, and we are managing performance, hiring and firing. They look at these main things, and that's kind of where it stops. But HR, the real HR, the HR that I think is an enabler to the business, and hence my use of the term rocket fuel for growth, is that HR is a function that is supposed to, by nature and by design, to set up your people for success and to enable your company to achieve its goals in the most efficient way possible with the best people possible and with the shortest distance from where you are today to that end goal. And you do that through a lot of the things that HR does, but also in how do you integrate people and human capability into that larger operation and optimize their usage and deployment to get to where you want to get to. And that's kind of the focus area that I really dove into. And I've spent the last 15 years doing this. And that's kind of how it started typically. And I just kind of fell into it. And it's history afterwards.
That's very cool. Well, I mean, you had some really interesting experiences. I mean, hyper growth and then collapse. And you said that 70% of scaling attempts failed due to people issues. And I think that's fascinating. And that kind of resonates. What are the most common mistakes that fast growing startups make on the road from, 10, 20, 30 people to, getting up to like 100?
Yeah, so I love that question. There are really 3 common themes that I see. And I've worked with more than 150 companies over my career so far on an advisory basis. So I've seen a lot of companies, and I'm talking, US, Europe, Middle East, Africa, not just US based. And there's a lot of commonalities I've seen. Like startup world really is kind of very similar across the world. There aren't very big differences. Some of them are culture in terms of how they do business, but for the most part, the mechanisms are the same. So the 3 main things I see are the following. The most egregious one, which really is the biggest problem in most cases, is throwing people at the problem. And what I mean by that, I see this mostly with companies that start experiencing some kind of success. They have the product market fit, they've hit 7 figures in revenue, they're starting to grow. The first reaction for them is, let's bring in more people, let's do more, let's sell more. And to them, that equation is simple as more people, we produce more, we make more money. Done deal, let's go with it. That is seldom the case, because what the point they miss in most cases is that if you don't have the operating infrastructure to sustain a larger team, it becomes subtraction by addition, right?
Yes.
So, which is the problem here, because you start having bottlenecks. The processes that worked for you at 10 and 20 people, they start breaking down at 50. Your quality goes down the drain. Your product is no longer focused and is all over the place. Decision making becomes fragmented, and there's a lot of inconsistency in how things are done. And what happens with that case is, when you're throwing people at the problem, your cost starts going up exponentially, but your revenue doesn't go up at the same scale. It actually lags behind. And what ends up happening is that they eat into their cash runway, and all of a sudden they fall flat. That's the biggest one I see. The second one I see is scaling too early. And what do I mean by that? Scaling in terms of, I'm not talking here about adding people. I'm talking about scaling the operation, meaning improving your technology and your operating infrastructure, maybe hiring or replacing some of your existing talent with more experienced people who've done it before. What I mean by scaling early is that the scaling piece, there is no specific formula for doing it, but there are certain things you need to pay attention to. When you're in a market and you have a product market fit, it means that you have a single focused or few focused products, and you have a client base, right, within the same target market that is growing. Where I see a lot of companies mistake product market fit and growth is when they start dispersing their product and going after multiple markets. Although the revenues increase in the immediate future, they assume that it's going to carry forward. But what they've done is they fragmented their customer base, and they've really opened up really multiple markets and multiple positionings. And what it does is it really makes it very difficult for them to double down on any one of them, and they spread themselves too thin to the point where they can't really leverage growth in any one of the markets. So they grow in the short term, then they hit a ceiling, and what they do in the meantime is they overinvest in improving their operations across all of these dimensions. And when revenue really goes flat, or even sometimes starts going down a little bit in some of these areas, it really hampers their ability to keep growing. And hence, in most cases, what I've seen before is that companies like this, they take a step back, they downsize, they go through a reduction in force, and a lot of them, they never recover. Because keep in mind, a lot of the companies we hear about in the news are the top 1% who have that VC or PE backing, right? It's 1% of all the companies. Only 1% of companies get any kind of outside investment. So the majority of companies typically are bootstrapped, and they're self-funded from their operation. And when you make this misstep, then you pretty much shoot yourself in the foot, and recovery becomes very difficult. The last one I see is generally a management issue, specifically from the founders and leaders of the organization. And that is bottlenecking the organization by hoarding all decision-making. And where that happens mostly, I see, is with founders who are people on the product side of things, engineering side of things, or delivery of service. People who, typically founders who had a very active role in developing whatever product or service that the company is known for. And they have a hard time letting go as they grow. And a big part of it is habits, another part of it is maybe trust and so forth. But letting go of that control becomes a bottleneck to them. And they start moving very slowly. They start making decisions which are lagging. Sometimes even the founder starts ignoring the advice and the input from people they hired who are supposedly more experienced or even have more knowledge in whatever it is the company's doing. And all of it's because there's this behavior and this thought process that I've experienced with many founders over the years is that, well, we got this far with me calling the shots. What's to say we're not going to go to 8 or 9 figures with me still calling the shots? I'm already successful. And it becomes an ego, like it becomes ego fuel for them that, you know, they've been successful up until this point doing it their way. Why do they need to change at this point? And typically 2 things happens with companies like this who have founders who have that kind of exhibit that kind of behavior. One, either they hit a ceiling and they just never bypass it because the founder refuses to let go of certain things that other people on their team can do better. or over time, they actually start shrinking and they hit a stability point, but they hit a ceiling and then they regress a little bit and they stay there.
Right.
So those I would say are the three big things I see. Like I've seen in a lot of these companies that I've worked with over the years.
You're so right in all of those, and throwing people at problems, and this happens all the time in big companies. It's not just
Yeah,
startups. It's just we just need to hire some more people.
exactly.
We'll let somebody else deal with this, and it almost never works. And then just scaling too fast. You see this a lot with companies that get a funding round,
Oh
and they
yeah,
have this pressure to deploy it, and so then they scale, they hire people, they deploy all their capital, and then they run out
exactly.
because it just wasn't very strategic in what they did because it was too early. They didn't have the right signals.
Yeah,
And the
and
last
what?
one, holding on, is so hard.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing and I think you mentioned a great point on, especially companies that get any kind of funding round. Typically, the first course of action for them is hiring people.
Right.
Typically, what I tell founders because I worked with a lot of companies in that space who are either sort of the cusp of funding or who I helped and worked with until they went through an exit and so forth. There's a distinction I think sometimes founders and leaders forget when it comes to hiring. You need to make a decision, first of all, on are you hiring for capacity or for capability? And what does that mean specifically? If you're trying to do more of the same and just become better at what you're doing today, right? And you just want to be more efficient, or you maybe want to increase your capacity to actually meet the demands of the market. It means you're hiring more people to do the same things that you already do today. But
Right.
the problem with that is if you know that it's a capacity hire, the first thing I typically advise folks is look at your operation and assess your operation. Is it running efficiently today? Because a lot of times what I've seen, and if I want to ballpark, it's probably maybe 60% of the time I would say of me working with founders who are saying they want to make hires and they end up falling within the capacity bucket. After we assess the operation and make changes, that need to hire goes away.
Yes.
Because they optimize their operation and they become leaner. The capability hire is the one which is interesting because when you're saying you're hiring for capability, it means you're bringing in talent to do something that your company lacks today, something you're not capable of doing yourself, right? You might be entering a new market, launching a new product line, and so forth, things that you just aren't equipped to do today. The biggest thing to look at with capability hiring is this a temporary need or is this a permanent need? And permanent typically, is this a core capability that's going to sustain your company moving forward and be a competitive advantage? Or is this something that you need in the short term for a certain project? It is complementary to your business, but it's not something I would consider something which really sets you apart in the market, right? So those I would say are some two distinctions which are interesting also to talk about when we're talking about adding headcount.
That makes so much sense. And just thinking about it and my experiences as well with founders, I mean that is absolutely correct.
Yeah,
We see,
exactly.
yeah,
I
see it
mean,
time after time.
Yeah, I mean, people make up if you look at like knowledge-based economy today, most companies within the tech space, knowledge space, and so forth, their headcount accounts for generally anywhere from 60 to 80% of their entire operating expense. I mean, if you take a step back and think of it, right, that is almost your entire operating spend going on your people. So what companies spend so much time and effort managing their finances in product, in sales, in warehousing, all that kind of stuff, right? But I mean, hello guys, 80% is sitting with your people. Why not try to optimize that as well? Because I mean, it's a significant piece of the pie.
It is. And it's a very different hire as well. If you're talking about hiring for capability, that's a different skill set. It's a different type of person. You still want A players, but a different type of person than something that is capacity is different than capability. And they're different worlds. It's a different mindset. It's a different kind of person. You either want somebody to come in, if it's capability, that is a trailblazer that wants to build something and knows how to do that. And if it's capability, it's a lot more about optimization and making
Exactly.
things better. But I love taking a step back and just saying, do we really need to do this? Or is this something that we can fix with our current people? And is it a process issue? Not do we throw people at it thinking that it's going to make it better?
Correct. Yeah. And more times than not, it is a process issue. Because, I
Yeah.
mean, when you look at it, I mean, most companies, when they're scaling and growing, they're focused mostly on the product and on selling and the margins, right? Everything else becomes secondary. But the problem is that you need to know when it's time to address these growing pains, because otherwise they eventually come back to bite you. But fixing something today is going to be much better. Like if you fix an operational optimization issue at 50 people, it's going to be much easier and cheaper to do and less painful than when you're at 150 employees. So there's companies I've worked with before who blew tens of millions of dollars on wasted operational spend just because they thought that, first of all, they did not know how much they were spending because they never even focused on it. They were focused on, okay, this is how much we're selling. This is how much our expenses. Hey, we're making a profit. Yay, thumbs up. Well, guys, you could have increased your profit by 15% had you done these few things here and there. So, and typically it's human nature too. When you're experiencing success and you see an upward trajectory, I mean, life looks great. You're successful. You're happy about it. You don't focus too much on the minute details, but that's also something that a lot of first-time founders fall into. Is they ride that success wave, but then only when they hit really a ceiling or they hit a roadblock do they take a step back and only look at some of the things they could fix. So they're kind of forced to do it at some point. And typically what I do with founders is I work with them early on to sort of detect these things and to build a scalable operation. Because what you want to do as a growing company, or even as any startup, is you want to operate lean, but also you want to be ready to grow whenever you need to grow. You don't want to have to break everything down and build it back up if, let's say, you had a product that's a hit and then you need to add 20 people and enter a few markets. You don't need to re-engineer the whole thing. You know where you are today. You have a solid infrastructure, and you just bolt on the pieces, and it works seamlessly.
Yeah, thinking about hitting the ceiling, and you're right. Just that success, it covers over a lot of problems. And then when you hit that ceiling, or there's a market change or something happens, and there's maybe a pullback in revenue or sales, I think it exposes a lot of those deficiencies that we've been living with. Because if we just can generate more revenue, we can cover that up and nobody knows.
Exactly.
And I think that's happened to a lot of companies.
Exactly. And something I've heard from founders before is, and especially in that specific case you're talking about, Jeff, is revenues are covering up. To them, it's like, hey, it's not even worth the trouble. We're making enough money to where this is insignificant.
Right.
And the assumption again is, and I see this almost all the time, the assumption is founders are by nature optimistic. Otherwise, they don't go through the leap of faith of starting their own business with nothing, right? And then grow from there. So they have a tendency and they have a propensity to be very optimistic, but there also needs to be a fine line between optimism and just outright delusion for no reason and based on no data. And I say this to them a lot of times: is you need it's always great to be optimistic, and you always want to look at, okay, what is the best case scenario, but you also want to look at what the information's telling you and look at both sides of the equation here. Right. I'm someone who loves planning for best case scenario, but at the same time, I need to make sure that am I actually doing the best I can today with my current operation, and am I equipped to survive today should an economic downturn hit me? And that's one of the first things typically I also say to founders is, okay, what would happen to your business if, let's say today, a good example is the whole tariff situation that's happening, right?
Yes.
So I was working with an e-commerce business about 5 years ago. It was an early stage organization, around 20 people. They were making around $10 to $12 million. And they were growing at a ridiculous pace. They were adding around $6-7 million in revenue a month. So
wow.
It was crazy. And it was during COVID time, and the whole e-commerce scene exploded during that time. Yeah. So one thing I asked them once is what they were doing is that they were buying a lot of inventory and storing it with the anticipation that growth is going to continue. what that also did is that they shored up their supply chain team, they shored up their procurement team, they shored up their product design team. So they shored up a lot of headcount. And one question I asked the team at that time is that, let's say that COVID ends in 12 months, all right, and your demand drops by 30% or 40%, right? What would happen? And they looked at me like I was on something, like I was smoking something.
Like that would never happen.
Like what are you talking about?
Revenue only goes up.
Aren't you looking at the numbers, right? And if it drops, it's not gonna drop back to where it was, right?
Right. Right.
Well, the ironic thing is that at the time, this was a company that I worked with for a short time. There were some things that they bought into, some things they did not. This was one of the things they did not buy into. I learned approximately 6 months ago that last year their revenues dropped below their revenue from 2-3 years ago. And then they started making changes earlier this year. Their headcount has been reduced by half, and they've actually been bought out by a competitor. And the founder was ousted from the organization.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's a good example. And again, it's always like a wake-up call to me. It's like, yeah, that's how fast things can change. So you always got to be cognizant and scenario plan. Okay, well, what if there's an economic downturn? Or maybe I launch a product that isn't as successful as my other products. Can I eat it? Can I sustain it? Am I going to have to slash half of my headcount because of it? If the answer is yes, then you need to reconsider your decision. Because for me, a lot of the success I have had with companies is helping them build an operation that weathers these storms. There's many companies I've worked with who bought into the system and bought into the frameworks that I work with, where they went through a lot of economic downturns, COVID and others and so forth, and they did not have to lay off a single person because they were so optimized in terms of how they operated with their headcount, the org structure, the empowerment, the decision-making, the right people, all the different components that get built in, to the point where the company can sustain its operations at the bare minimum. But if it needs to go into overdrive, it can do it pretty quickly.
That's really, really smart.
Yeah.
Are you missing key relationships that could transform your leadership? Most leaders are. They just can't see it. And here's what shocked me. The most successful leaders aren't lone heroes. They're the center of 4 specific relationships that multiply their impact while preserving their sanity. You're probably like everybody else, drowning in connections, but starving for real support. And it's creating a silent epidemic of leadership burnout among executives just like you. So, take my free assessment at thecaptainskeys.com. Discover which critical relationships you're missing in under 5 minutes, and then grab my new book, The Captain's Keys, part Netflix drama, part game-changing blueprint for leadership that actually sustains you. One CEO called it the owner's manual I never got. So stop flying blind and see what you're missing. So what is your blueprint for building HR as a business enabler rather than an administrative cost center, especially in a high growth environment like that?
Yeah. I love that. And it is the question that I think every leader should be asking from their HR department, HR team, especially if they have one. A lot of the companies I work with, my first engagement with them is they don't have an HR function. To them, it's like, hey, we need someone to run this basic compliance stuff and admin stuff just to get it off our back.
Right.
But then we go into more deeper things. But to go back to your question, the fundamental Achilles heel of HR people in general to why we have that reputation of back office admin is that HR, for the most part, does not understand the business they're in at the level of detail of their executive peers. And what do I mean by that? Most HR people, and this is not just me making this up, there was a study by Korn Ferry approximately 3 to 4 years ago. And Korn Ferry is one of the largest, human capital consulting companies in the world. And check this out. Executives, as well as HR executives, ranked business acumen as the biggest issue with HR professionals, meaning they don't understand the business. 41% of respondents to that survey of thousands of executives ranked business acumen as the biggest issue plaguing HR leaders. That stat on its own, and so that was 41% of folks answering that. The next thing was around 20%. So you can see the majority of people are like, yeah, that's their biggest issue. So that on its own is telling to me, and it kind of proves something that I've actually experienced myself. HR folks, for the most part, what they do is when they come into an organization, they don't spend enough time and effort to understand how all the nuts and bolts fit together. So let's say I'm in a software company, right? And a software company has some different components. There's a product team, engineering team. In a lot of cases, they're built into Scrum teams where they're building certain features. They go through sprints. There's a certain mechanism of how they measure output. There's epics, there's points, there's all that kind of stuff. Most HR people, if you ask them, and most HR people today, if they're in a software company and you go and ask them, how can you determine if your software development team is actually producing up to expectations or not? They will stare at you with a blank face. Yeah. And they're like, what are you talking about? They can tell you how much the salaries are and how much it's costing you, but they can't tie anything back to, okay, this is how much I'm spending, but how is it actually tying into business outcomes? How is it helping the company do things better? And let me give you an example that ties this in beautifully, because this is an example that I actually experienced myself, and sort of, I think it's an example I go to a lot of times because I think it exemplifies what it means for HR to be an enabler for the business. So I was working with a SaaS company. This was 2 years ago, I think, 2.5 years ago, a company that was pre-revenue. So they did not have any revenues yet. They were getting some funding. It was a VC-funded organization. It was a Series B. They had around $120 million in funding, so pretty massive. But pre-revenue, had a lot of backing. A game-changing product, and I was on the advisory team for the HR, and I was brought in to attend one of their board meetings. And the reason being is that I had conducted this detailed analysis on their headcount and their manpower planning. And my advice was that you guys are going to crash yourselves to the ground within 18 months if you don't hit your revenue target with your current headcount. And again, they're like, okay, how do you even come up with this stuff? And so the board actually asked me to go and attend because they're like, okay, this is interesting. No one else in the organization is telling us this. Why is this HR person who's even outside the company coming? Right. Where's this coming from? So this board meeting included the CFO, the CEO, the chief technology officer, chief product officer, and all that kind of stuff. The gap they had in their analysis was that they were looking at, okay, this is how much we're spending in our headcount. These are our revenue projections. We expect that we're going to be able to release XYZ products within a certain timeline, right? And they're basing all of it off of that. Big assumption, right? But the big assumption here was that they were assuming a certain productivity a cadence. There was a certain velocity for their teams, right? What they were missing, though, is they were assuming velocity at optimum levels, meaning that this was a company that was growing. This was a company that was adding people every month. So the expectation was that every Scrum team was going to produce X, but they weren't accounting for the onboarding time before they can hit X. It's typically X minus something, right? Also, they weren't looking at the time to hire and time to fill, because there were certain positions in the industry they were working in which were super difficult to get, where their typical time to hire was, for most roles, 45 days. They had some critical roles which took up to 90 days at the time, because there were such niche type of positions. And those roles, they were actually going through third-party recruiters to hire. So there's an additional expenditure. So I plugged in all of these details together and did the analysis. And how I did that is I worked with their individual engineering heads and their teams to understand the metrics they're using for productivity and velocity. And I tied it into cost. And I actually measured for them how much it's costing them per sprint, per feature, per product. And I tied it in all together with their headcount, but also with all the metrics around how long does it take you to fill the team. What if they also did not consider attrition. You have turnover. If someone leaves, capacity falls. By the time they come in and they ramp up, that's another situation. So when you plug all these things together, it showed that they were looking at the ideal scenario at maximum capacity throughout the entire period. And when you plug in all these assumptions, which are things that from an HR perspective you have access to in terms of data, but you need to understand how to put them together in a meaningful story. So I modeled them out in a financial model. And when I walked everyone through it, They're like, well, I'll be damned. That's well, yeah. And the decision then was that they ended up cutting 2 products that they were actually trying to build, because when they looked at this, like, you know what, if we actually start this, we can't finish them. So we need to finish these specific priority products, which will actually get us revenue, because the others we won't be able to get to market, and we'll actually run out of cash before then. So that whole scenario of business decisions and changes started from an HR analysis, generally speaking. Most HR people, unfortunately, won't even think along those lines, because to them, this is outside of their purview. Like, what do you mean you're looking at velocity metrics for a sprint team and trying to understand how they're measuring output and all that? So for me, that is the starting point, and that is the point you want to start with all the time. Understand how the nuts and bolts work together, and then you also need to understand financials very well. And that's also another issue with a lot of HR people. If you give them financial statements, they'll look at them, they can interpret some of the things, but a lot of the things they'll be like, okay, I don't know what I'm looking at here. So when I'm looking at financial statements, I'm looking at their balance sheet, I'm looking at their cash flow statements, I'm looking at all the stuff that's in there, and I'm drawing some conclusions, but also speaking to the right people to put some context to the information I'm saying. Because sometimes you might see numbers without the right context. They might say something, whereas there's something else. So yeah, understanding the business in a lot of details and understanding the financials of the organization, because at the end of the day, the financials are going to drive what you can do and your capabilities in terms of developing your organization, going to market, and so forth. And HR has to complement what the business is doing. It can't open up its own silo and camp on the side and say, hey, we want to do this and we want to do that. Well, you're missing all the context that would allow you to even make that kind of decision and make that kind of recommendation. So for me, it's all about business understanding. You need to be a business person first and apply the HR lens to it to be able to impact business. And that's kind of the approach I like using.
So good. So good. And I love the analysis. And it's just something that I think too few companies do, whether it comes from HR or whether it comes from somewhere else, really understanding that and just, what are those assumptions? And understanding, I think it's brilliant. What is the cost of a feature? What's the cost of a product? And I think that changes how we think about new feature development. Wow, is that feature really worth $100,000?
Yeah.
No.
Exactly.
And let's not do it. Let's do something that actually is worth the investment.
Exactly.
So it's a different mindset.
Yeah, and all I did not create anything that wasn't there. What I did is I used all the information that's around me, right? But again, another thing that an HR person, and this is not an HR person only, but any business leader, you need to know where to look for information. And you can only do that when you understand how all the nuts and bolts fit together. If you don't understand all the dependencies in the organization and how everything is put together and how one action results in what kind of reaction and what kind of dependencies, you are going to struggle to find this information. You won't know that it even exists or even that where to look for it. And that's kind of something I like to bring to the table is I spend most of my time, at least in the initial stages. Typically when I work with companies, it's usually a multi-month engagement, sometimes multi-year engagement. There's companies I've worked with for 7 to 8 years at one point. There's companies where I've worked with at 6 months to a year, but typically it's usually within that time frame. I spend the first 30 to 60 days just understanding the little details about how their business operates. And typically one of the goals I have for myself with any engagement is I want to be able to speak to the business like the best person in the business who can do it, and if not better. Like if you put me in a room with anyone in that organization, they cannot tell that I haven't been in this business for a while. That for me is a starting point, because if you present yourself in that manner, you immediately build the credibility and trust with the people you're working with. Because one of the first reactions that not just HR people, any newcomer, be it as an external advisor, a fractional leader and so forth, the first reaction you get is, well, what do you know? We've been doing this it's working. Right. What do you know? Well, let me tell you what I know so far. And you start presenting the details and all that. And then it's like, okay, you know what you're talking about here. Let's have a conversation. The mindset changes, the attitude changes. And you need that trust, and you need to build that at the beginning, because otherwise it's going to be a struggle to move an organization from point A to point B, even if what you're saying is true. And regardless, there's the human element of trust building that you need to bypass, and you need to show credibility. And if you don't show that, the distance from A to B is going to be much longer. It's going to be much more arduous. It's going to be a bit of a pain. So that's also something which is important when you're doing things like this, especially in scaling companies and companies that are undergoing a lot of changes very frequently.
Oh, so good. And I love that. Just having that outside perspective is so valuable. And having somebody else come in just because things are maybe going well or maybe not. But to have somebody come in and take a look at the business and do that deep dive and provide that outside perspective is tremendously valuable, especially when you can talk about it at that depth.
Yeah, it's one point. I mean, it's a fascinating point you bring up. For some reason, and I don't know, I even don't know the answer to this, but for some reason, a lot of companies, they will place better faith in an external advisor than someone internal who might be saying the same thing sometimes.
That's true.
And it's still, it still blows my mind. And that's actually one of the things I work with, when I'm doing my service, working in services is my model typically is, I compare it to how governments sometimes outsource, things like utilities, like build, operate, and transfer model. So they outsource it to someone to build it and to operate it temporarily up until it's mature, and then they transfer it back to the original owner. I like to use that analogy in my work because I think if I want to be a true partner to any organization and I want to really live up to what I'm trying to sell companies, is that I want to get them to a point where they are self-sustainable. They don't need to come to people like me, regardless if it's me or not. But ideally, when a business grows, you want to mature to a point where it is able to make these same kind of decisions and these same types of situations without having to come to you every single time. So my model typically is, hey, I'll come in, I'll help you build this thing up. I will operate it for you because generally smaller companies, they don't need a full-time person like me. First of all, it's expensive for them. Second of all, there isn't enough work to justify it. It's not only a finance thing, it's that the workload just doesn't justify it. But as they grow, there comes a point where, you need someone full-time for handling the people side of things. And at that time, my mandate becomes, I'm going to help you find the right person. I'm going to help onboard them for you and sort of walk them through the journey of what we've done, help them out, and then completely transfer it over to them. And I, go into the sunlight. So that's kind of the model I like using, is you want to build a company to mature and become self-sustainable, where they can go through similar things moving forward. And it starts with internal trust of their team too, not all the time going to external folks.
That's good. At what stage should founders be thinking seriously about ditching the $99 a month, phone HR service and really start thinking about true, HR leadership, whether that's fractional or full time?
Yeah, no, I love that question. I think for most companies, from what I've seen, around the 40 to 50 person mark is where you want to seriously consider bringing someone in, either on fractional or full time. The $99 per month, kind of an outsourced service and so forth, it works very well up until like your 20, 30 people, because typically speaking, really, there isn't much to do beyond hiring people. Really. And also when it comes to, if you want to weigh it in terms of risk factor, compliance, and some of the boring HR stuff, right? Typically companies under 50 employees, risk is super, super low, unless they do something really egregious, like harassment, all that kind of stuff. But typically, let's be honest, the government doesn't really care about companies of that size. Unless it's something really egregious and someone just files a claim against that company, no one's even going to look. They're rarely, if ever, going to pop up in any kind of random audit of some sorts. So they might not have certain policies in place, certain things in place that they might even need to have from a legal perspective. The risk is so low, and the fine is actually so small to the point where it actually makes makes more financial sense to eat the fine and not hire someone. So which is unfortunate to say, but it is the reality of things.
Sure.
But yeah, once you start hitting that 40 to 50 person mark, you need to start looking into this. And the reason being is because typically at the smaller size, the founder and maybe their co-founder and so forth, they're kind of managing all of the HR stuff, right? And again, it's very small, but as you grow, things grow with it. The scale grows as well. There's a lot more complications. Also, you don't know everyone on a day-to-day basis anymore because the team size is bigger. And you can't be everywhere at once, and it's not even your area of expertise. And there's a lot of landmines in HR world that you can step onto that you might not think are important at this point in time, but they could cost you a lot of money. One good example I like using is the whole hiring of contractors versus full-timers and part-time folks. I can tell you how many times I've seen companies really botch how they work with contractors, because there's rules and regulations around what a contractor can do versus can't do in terms of how you define their work scope. And if for some reason it's flagged by the government, you can be fined for misclassifying them as a contractor versus a full-timer and get fined and have to pay, back taxes, benefit. So it becomes pretty expensive. So there's a lot of things of that sort that start happening as you start growing that you, as a founder, you're not expected to know and you're not expected to deal with. So my advice typically is start out with someone who at least is fractional, or bring in, and you don't need to bring in like a senior executive HR leader like myself or so forth. You can bring in someone who has a couple of years of experience in HR. They've done some of this, basic groundwork at least to sort of set up your infrastructure to where you're not stepping on landmines. When you start accelerating, then you need someone who's been there and done that, because it'll help you get to where you want to get to faster. It's going to make your life easier. It's going to help optimize your team to focus on what you need to focus on to create revenue and increase your profitability. And it sets you up for success moving forward. It's, invest a little today to reap the rewards in the future. The same thing applies here.
So good. Well, for SaaS founders that don't have that HR background, what are maybe 2 or 3 key metrics or signals that they should always keep an eye on to monitor the health of their people ops?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the first things I ask all founders to look at is always make sure that your headcount expense is now outpacing your revenue growth. And I say this specifically for bootstrap companies. If you're an investor-backed company, sometimes this is by design. And what I mean by that, if you're in an industry which requires a lot of upfront investment in technology before you can start selling, think like an Amazon in the early days, right? Amazon, like Spotify, some of these companies, they only started, getting profits not too long ago, given how much time they've been in the market. The reason being there's in such a capital intensive industry where the cost of doing business is that, and you need to invest so much upfront before you reap the rewards. But if we want to talk about the 99% of companies that are not venture backed and don't have this crazy amount of capital, that is not a reality for them. So the reality for them is you can only stretch your wings as much as your bank account allows you to. And one of the first things I ask founders to do is always look at your revenue and look at your headcount expense. And when I mean headcount expense, I'm not talking about salaries only, because this is also a pitfall that they fall into. It's their salaries, their benefits, their perks, their equipment, their software licenses, because these are all things that you de facto inherit as costs whenever you bring in any additional person into the company. So as long as your headcount expenses are not outpacing your revenues as a start, you're doing well. You don't want to be breaking even, right? Because there's also the profit to look at, but you want to make sure that revenue is outpacing the growth of employee expenses. That's always the first given I look at. The second thing I'll look at is the span of control in the organization. And what I mean by that is, how many are you starting to create layers for managers and so forth who are managing onesie, twosie people, as opposed to trying to optimize and hire people who have multiple skill sets who can handle multiple jobs? And why do I say this? If you're a startup, specifically if you are one, again, I like using the 99% example because the 1% are the exception, right? If you're like most startups, you want to be very lean in your operation. You don't want to hire one person for every single thing that you want to do. If you're able to hire someone who can do sales and marketing at the same time, you want to go down that route, as opposed to having one person for this, one person for that early on. Look at whether you have 1 or 2 people doing every single job versus how are you starting to create management layers where people are just managing like 1 or 2 people. That is creating a hierarchy of inflation. And typically it usually never rolls back from that. What happens is as you start adding these layers, those layers start adding more layers and so forth. Like I can't tell you how many companies I've seen before where you have 3 layers of the organization where one person is managing 1 or 2 people, and that person has 1 or 2 people they're managing. And I'm like, what's the point of that? All it does is it slows you down, it increases your operating expenditure, and there's nothing good that comes from it. So I like maintaining a flat hierarchy in the beginning for most companies. 6 to 8 people to manage within a manager or a founder, I think, is a sweet spot. Any more than that, then you need to start considering reconfiguration. So especially for a founder, I say for their own span of control, 6 to 8 is kind of the sweet spot. Any more than that, then you're being stretched too thin to where you're not being effective in one specific area. Right. So that's the second thing I like to talk to them about. The final thing is, and this isn't a metric, but this is sort of an action item I give to every founder. I ask them to open up, a document, spreadsheet, piece of paper, whatever works for you. Write down every single thing you do in the company. Every single thing, from responding to customer emails to getting involved in products and so forth. Out of all these things that you list down, identify which ones you think you're good at, and 2, which ones you like doing. Okay? The reason I say this is the following. Every founder, without exception, who I've asked to do this, they list a plethora of things. Like there's a laundry list, right? And it's expected because everyone's wearing, and it's the same for everyone. Everyone's wearing multiple hats. Let's say for a hypothetical reason, an example, they listed 20 things, right, that they do. And that's a small number for founders, but let's say 20 things, right? Sure. Out of the 20, they will probably flag 3 to 5 that they're actually good at. Out of those 3 to 5, maybe 2 or 3 that they actually enjoy doing. So why do I ask them to do this? Because as a founder, if you want to be a founder that's going to actually help your company grow and scale, you need to put yourself in the mindset of doing this exercise all the time, because this is your first indicator of what you need to outsource or delegate completely. If it's something that you don't like doing and you're not good at, the last thing I tell them about, hey, do you want to outsource or delegate this? If it's critical to your business, then delegate it to someone inside your organization who can do it. Even if they don't do it as good as you do, right? You can get them there, but get it off your plate. If it's something which is not really a key thing for your business, outsource it completely. Just toss it out of your company. Get a service provider, let them do it for a flat fee, monthly fee, whatever it is. Just forget about it. You are wasting your time. Because if you're a small company, a founder, everything you do has to be purposeful and impact the business. If you're doing anything that isn't great for the business or even benefits it, you don't need to be doing it. So those 3 to 5 things that they've identified, I asked founders to focus on those and start thinking of who do they outsource the others to, right? And who do they delegate these to? And it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. Yeah. So I typically tell them, hey, over the next 90 days to 120 days, start handing off some of these things to others and don't get involved in them. Meaning, don't go micromanage because you've delegated this. Just train people, onboard them, hand it over to them, right? Provide some oversight and then just let it be. Almost every single time, managers and founders specifically consider that to be the best thing they've ever done. Yep, because right. it allowed them to focus on the areas in which they add value. Because if you think about it, founders, they inherit this CEO role as their company grows. It's not by choice. They sort of grow into it because, hey, the company's growing, we're adding teams, we're adding departments. I can't tell you how many founders I've spoken to have no clue what certain functions do. They just know they needed them and they hired them, but they have no clue what that function does. Completely. They're like, I have no idea. I know that this person gets this stuff done and they come to me for decisions and I'm like, I don't know. It's one of those things that I would probably rather not do, but who else is going to do it? I'm the head of the company. I have to do it. Like, no, you don't. So we work on optimizing how they spend their time. Founders, typically, they have a tendency to burn themselves out. So what you need to do is make sure that you optimize their work, help them focus on what they're good at so they can grow and help their company grow. So those are some of the 3 things that I usually talk to most founders about.
So good. Well, where can people learn more about you and about organized chaos online?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to connect with me, happy to do that. You can also go to the website organizedchaos.fyi. I have a newsletter where I kind of teach folks all the stuff that I preach and the stuff that I work with in companies. There's also a podcast version for those who enjoy the audio as well. So yeah, if anyone wants to learn more and wants to get into sort of my world of how I handle HR and how I work with startups, they can do that. And if someone wants to work with me and likes my input in terms of what they can do for the organization, there's also all the contact details on the website that they can refer to, and happy to have a chat anytime.
Awesome. It's been such a great conversation. Thanks for being on SaaS Fuel.
Thank you. Appreciate it. This was amazing. And you've been an amazing host. I appreciate it.
Thanks again, Nahed, for coming on the show and sharing your journey and insights. You can learn more about Nahed at organizedchaos.fyi. As always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And of course, check out our YouTube channel. It's at Champion Leadership. Thought leaders share. Share this episode with a VC who ghosted you, just to remind them what good taste sounds like. Everyone who shares this week gets a personalized pitch deck bookmarker that screams product market fit every time they scroll past your email. And coming up, what if your reputation was your company's most valuable growth asset? Next week, Vitaly Motuz shares how local businesses and SaaS teams alike are turning reviews into revenue using smart, simple tools that manage online trust. It's a crash course in owning your narrative before someone else writes it for you. And the next Thursday, 1 week from today, we have Casey Wu. He joins us to unpack how he's led companies through IPOs, exits, and everything in between, serving as CFO, COO, and strategic guide across multiple industries. From boardroom clarity to back office precision, this one is packed with growth wisdom. So I will see you next time, and as always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/SaaSFuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.